What if I told you What if I told you you're racist? What if I told you that you didn't get to choose if you were or not? What if I told you that you have an unconscious bias because of a system put in place before you entered the world? I know. The conversation of race is one that can be exhausting, difficult, if you may. It can be hard to listen to. It can be hard to talk about. It's harder to experience. I'm sure we've all had our moments where we'd rather shy away from the issue of racism. I have, and at times I still do. But as I've grown older, I've realised that silence is complacency. I've realised that silence is violence. And in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., there comes a time where silence is betrayal. And that's why I'm here today. Because not only do I feel I have a responsibility to advocate for people of colour, I know I have a responsibility to the human race. To hold each other accountable. To help create a world in which we all feel comfortable. And although it might sound a little bit corny, to be the change that I want to see. Even if it's just in my little corner of the world. But most importantly, I feel I have a responsibility to myself. You see, I grew up being the black friend. The black friend who didn't want to make anybody uncomfortable. The one who didn't want to talk about race and how difficult it can be. You see the way I mocked myself there? It's because, honestly, I've heard it before, and to be honest with you, I have also thought it. I grew up being the black friend who wasn't too loud but fun enough, wasn't too hood or ratchet but cool enough, the one who played the piano and the cello and did ballet but could rap Bodak Yellow word for word and sing Ed Sheeran without missing a note. Malleable, you could call me. But you see, that kind of changed when I moved here to Switzerland. You see, the racism I had experienced before was less frequent but obvious, so it was easier to call out. But the issues that glare at me now are smiling. An example of this would be, for example, in the UK, it would be walking down the street and having the N-word screamed at me. But now it's walking through the corridors and being stopped by people I don't really know and being asked, what do your parents do for a living? Or being told by some of my classmates when they first met me, they thought I would assault them, beat them up. Or people being upset when I'm not the first person to speak up about racial injustice. Or I remember one personal experience, in an international school, it's very common to be asked, where are you from, right? And I thought my obvious response would be the UK, because it's the place I was born and raised. So I replied, the UK. But I remember being looked at with sympathy and being asked again, where do you really come from? In your heart. You see, it's before being seen as the 17-year-old girl, it's being seen as the black 17-year-old girl. It's people seeing your skin colour before they see you. And the examples I just gave may seem minor, insignificant, or maybe even stupid. But you see, that's the difference between overt and covert racism. Overt racism is explicit, it's obvious, so usually people would disagree with it, right? But covert racism is implicit, it's subtle, and so often people get gaslighted. And the way Fitchburg State University actually put it, saying that it gives perpetrators a claim to plausible deniability, which means very often you can get told you're being sensitive or you're overthinking it or they didn't mean it like that. But you see, these happen not necessarily because somebody has an obvious or is obviously being ill-willed or has an obvious hatred towards someone. It's unconscious. It's an unconscious bias. And a paper from Yale actually said that it affects up to 90 to 95% of people. And this means that it actually spills into almost every sector of life. It was shown that 74% white applicants are 74% more likely to be successful than ethnic minorities with an identical CV. White participants in the study were found to see black faces as more threatening than white faces with the exact same facial expression. And whilst stereotypes and unconscious bias is a problem, there's a reason for it. You know, we as humans are people with labels. We like to categorize things. It helps us make sense of the complexity of the world around us. And so, you know, this means that we all have unconscious biases. We all have racial prejudices. However, this is really a problem when we look at our criminal justice system, for example, where we have members in authority who are supposed to protect certain people, but the same people they're supposed to protect, they are also taught to fear, subconsciously, because of what? The media, the way we were raised, the environment that we grew up in. And so in that moment, their unconscious bias is triggered, in that moment of flight or fight. In that moment where the person they're supposed to protect, they also see as a weapon. They also see as dangerous. And so their unconscious biases are triggered. And in that moment, they can pull their triggers. And so if this is not something that is discussed, if this is not something that we see worthy of reflection, of introspection, if we don't look inside of ourselves, then we see that this is not only something that people, like my example, that some people may seem as silly, being asked what my parents do for a living, but it becomes an issue of life or death for some. And so I want to say that this is not about guilt, right? This is about human dignity, human rights. And I used the word human race earlier, and I said that on purpose because, you know, I know that some people, for some, especially now, saying the human race instead of just saying it simple is controversial. But I said that on purpose because I know we all have one common ancestor. I know we all come from the same mitochondrial Eve, and so I know that this isn't about, you know, a fight between black or white and pink and blue and yellow and green. This is about humanity versus the issue of racism. And so if I were to ask the question again, if I were to ask myself the question again, my answer would be yes. We all have unconscious biases. We all have racial prejudice. But the real question is, will we reflect? Will we look inside of ourselves, and how will that change the way we interact and see other people on a daily basis? Thank you.